Was a bold move received enthusiastically by nearly all members in the new parliament. As the Lithuanian flag was raised and they sang the national anthem once banned by the communists, Lithuania proclaimed that it had returned to the status it enjoyed up until the Soviet Red Army invaded in 1940. Soviet laws declared the parliament would no longer apply in Lithuania, and the words socialist and Soviet would be dropped from the official title. Down, too, came all the symbols, including the old hammer and sickle. Western nations were asked to recognize the new independent state. The Lithuanian action was a major challenge to Moscow, but one that most delegates to today's emergency session of the full Soviet parliament seemed to take in stride.
If Lithuania wants to divorce with Russia or another republic, how to stop? Impossible. They are people. They have to have freedom.
But as Mikhail Gorbachev opened the session, he termed the Lithuanian vote alarming. The decisions taken infringe on the eventual fate of the republic, its people, and the whole country.
In the world's second
culmination, the vote was overwhelming, and so was this. The hammer and sickle were pried off the front of the parliament building. Inside the chamber, the Lithuanian flag was raised. The timing is especially crucial with an important parliamentary session opening today in Moscow. Tom Pettit reports.
The Congress of People's Deputies opened amid a national crisis for the Soviet Union, Lithuanian secession, and a crossroads for President Gorbachev seeking extraordinary new powers. Gorbachev called the Lithuanian independence vote alarming.
The decisions that are being taken there affect the fundamental interests of the Soviet Union.
Gorbachev is asking the Congress to approve sweeping executive powers with a fixed four-year presidential term. The special Congress assembled expecting heated debate but eventual approval. Strong resistance will come from Muslim republics. They and other breakaway republics may boycott the vote. Arriving delegates this morning have Lithuania on the mind. Academician Georgy Arbatov saying Lithuania was not unexpected, but
I hope perestroika will survive.
But for the 2,500 delegates, the loudest voice is Gorbachev.
Не возникает. Можно ставить на голосование.
The Congress is expected to last 2 or 3 days. For Gorbachev, long days. As once again, Gorbachev goes for broke. Tom Pettit, NBC News, Moscow.
Other fault lines are developing in the Soviet Empire this morning. The ruling Politburo in the remote Republic of Mongolia has resigned, with pro-democracy forces challenging the Communist Party's exclusive hold on power. And the Congress of Estonia is appealing to the United Nations.
Ruled out any talks on secession with all three Baltic republics. Kremlin spokesman Gennady Gerasimov echoed Mr. Gorbachev's reaction to Lithuania's self-proclaimed secession.
By itself, it's very small. It's only a little bit more than 1% territory-wise, a little bit more than 1% population-wise, a little bit more than 2% industry-wise and agriculture-wise. So it is small. But Lithuania is the first and creates a precedent which can vary. And also, who likes separatists? You cannot expect Moscow or Soviets like separatists.
Mikhail Gorbachev ordered the implementation of a series of measures against Lithuania, including banning the privatization of Soviet industry, the introduction of a local currency, and the setting up of customs posts. The orders came after a note signed by Lithuania's leaders refused Gorbachev's demand last Friday to retract their independence declaration. Over the weekend, the battle of nerves intensified as Soviet armored cars were placed on the border, Air Force planes flew over the capital, and
hours the Republic reaffirmed its decision to break away from Moscow. Amid increasing tensions, Lithuania is calling the Kremlin's bluff today, Tuesday, March the 20th, 1990.
From NBC.
Soviet disunion, Lithuania and the Kremlin are staring each other down. The small Baltic republic demanding independence, the huge superpower insisting on unity. The talk out of Moscow is tough. The question is, how far will Mikhail Gorbachev go to back it up? Tom Pettit reports from Moscow.
Lithuania is not knuckling under to Gorbachev. It is not intimidated. President Landsbergis is under heavy pressure. Today, he was saying Lithuania takes the warning from Gorbachev as an invitation to negotiate.
When the officials in Moscow will be more reasonable.
Lithuanians are well aware the USSR can be very unreasonable.
The power's in their hands.
A visiting American teacher, Anita Lee, from Plano, Texas.
Their feeling is that they will have independence, whatever the cost.
The government of the USSR draws attention to the danger of breaking links.
Last night's warning on Soviet TV was given again today.
Правительство СССР обращает внимание на опасность нарушения сложившихся связей.
Specifically, Lithuania was sharply warned against issuing its own currency, setting up its own customs service, against declaring an international border. The warning is very pointed. Do not take over any property of the USSR, including any nuclear power station. As executive president, Gorbachev is clearly prepared for a showdown with little Lithuania, which is about the size of Kentucky. Tom Pettit, NBC News.
On the breakaway Baltic Republic, but Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze has given an assurance that force will not be used against independence movements. He was speaking in Namibia, where the world's newest nation is celebrating its independence on the 30th anniversary of the Sharpeville massacre in neighbouring South Africa.
In the meeting with Secretary Baker, Foreign Minister Shevardnadze did not categorically rule out use of military force to settle Moscow's dispute with Lithuania, but he repeatedly indicated it was not the way Moscow intended to go. After the talks, Baker indicated Shevardnadze had given even stronger assurances in private that the Soviets would resolve their crisis peacefully.
He said that force would not be the solution as far as the Soviet Union is concerned. They want to solve the problem through dialogue. He said that several times. And as I've said before, there's no reason that we know of not to take him at his word.
They were present at the stroke of midnight when the last colony in Africa.
Good evening. Thanks for joining Late Edition. With just 2 days to the election, the economy remains. Government there defying Mikhail Gorbachev's order to surrender firearms and impose stricter visa and border checks. President Gorbachev issued the decree under the new powers accorded him last week, but leaders say it has no force in the rebel republic because it's left the Soviet Union. And as Rick Inderfirth reports, young Lithuanian conscripts are leaving the Soviet army in droves.
At the Lithuanian Parliament building in Vilnius, deserters from the Red Army are showing up to register. Lithuania's declaration of independence 10 days ago, as well as reports of ill treatment, have prompted hundreds of Lithuanian youth to flee their military obligation and return home. And the new Lithuanian government is standing behind them. After forms are filled out,
designed as a show of force, the biggest display of Soviet military power in Lithuania since it proclaimed independence. The Red Army calls it legitimate maneuvers on territory it still considers to be part of the Soviet Union. Residents call it provocative, a foreign army, they say, on foreign soil. But it's still not known if today's military activity means reinforcements are arriving. The man under relentless pressure as a result of Moscow's tactics is the Lithuanian President Vytautas Landsbergis. This morning he attacked Moscow's order to surrender weapons to the military.
It's a pity that this order was done. I think it's a mistake.
The Lithuanian parliament is doing its best to ignore the threat.
Moscow is fast approaching another climax. A Kremlin deadline for the return of deserters to the Red Army is looming. Foreign correspondents have been barred from entering Lithuania, and 2 US diplomats have been expelled from the rebel republic. Neil Ross reports that President Gorbachev may be under pressure from his own military to end the impasse.
Psychological warfare above Lithuania. Soviet helicopters rain down demands for an end to independence. Look, Gorbachev signed it, this woman says. He ought to be ashamed. Why doesn't he leave us alone? No chance of that. Soviet army commanders enter the rebellious parliament on the trail of deserters from the Red Army. The Kremlin's generals are also there, seeking answers to President Gorbachev's other ultimatums, the disarming and disbanding of Lithuania's volunteer forces. Some young deserters have taken refuge in psychiatric hospitals. They admit they're scared of being recaptured. Their families are also feeling the strain. There's fear the hospitals may soon be surrounded. Haunted by the drone of helicopters and the clatter of army boots, the Lithuanian parliament continues to defy Moscow. A former KGB official is named as a new minister in the government. Will you obey only our constitution, demands the president, yes or no? Yes, replies the ex-KGB officer. Is Russian law valid here? No, he says. Relief at the brave words. There's growing concern in the White House that the situation in Lithuania is worsening. For the third time this week, President Bush calls for a negotiated end to the crisis.
Any attempt to coerce or intimidate or forcibly intervene against the Lithuanian people is bound to backfire.
In this David and Goliath battle, there are many eyes awaiting the outcome. Half a dozen other Soviet republics have also been campaigning for independence. We are watching Lithuania, says this Moldavian deputy, to see the price of independence. If it's too high, we'll have to wait. Moscow's pledges of non-violence run parallel with images of great power. Some fear Lithuania's defiance could force
tough words with action, and the Lithuanian president has appealed to the West for help.
Soviet paratroopers stormed this hospital in Vilnius just a few hours ago, abducting over a dozen deserters from the Russian army. The violence of the attack is evident in the fresh blood on the stairs and the broken doors. Eyewitnesses said the corridor was green with Russian soldiers as they pushed their way past security guards and nurses. The Lithuanian deserters had taken refuge in this hospital on the advice of Lithuanian leaders. They were allegedly under the protection of the Red Cross here. The violent assault by Russian troops comes after a day of talks between high-ranking Soviet officers and Lithuanian leaders. The deputy prime minister said after those meetings that the mood here had improved, that conflict...
Broadened its Lithuania, imposing stiff limits on foreigners traveling in that rebellious Baltic republic. The action comes as Soviet troops continue their search for Lithuanian army deserters who have sought sanctuary. At the same time, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev has called a meeting of the leaders of the 15 republics to discuss the ongoing tensions in Lithuania today, Wednesday, March the 28th, 1990.
From NBC News, This Day, with Bryant Gumbel and Deborah Norval.
Welcome to Today on a Wednesday morning. Good morning. Nice to be back.
This morning, the newly rebuilt Soviet government is going to work on the problem of Lithuania. Armed with his new presidential powers, Mikhail Gorbachev is calling the leaders of the 15 Soviet republics together. But in Lithuania, the spirit of independence lives on despite the Soviet crackdown. Peter Kent reports from Vilnius.
There is a sense of restrained optimism in Vilnius this morning, matched by sunny spring weather here, that Moscow may be ready to deal with the breakaway republic with words, not truths. Armed Soviet soldiers still occupy the 3 buildings claimed by Moscow, but Lithuania's deputy prime minister says the talks he had with unidentified Soviet authorities Tuesday have renewed hopes for a negotiated settlement to the crisis. But rumors continue to circulate that troops may yet be ordered to seize other buildings, like the television station, to stop pro-independence domestic programming and the transmission of foreign TV news stories. Telephone operators say Moscow has now forbidden long-distance phone calls. And the status of foreign journalists here remains in doubt. Some newsmen have been told they must leave Lithuania immediately. Others that they can stay a few days more until their visas expire. Moscow feels foreign journalists are complicating the sensitive situation here, but Lithuania's leaders say the presence of newsmen serves to discourage any wider use of military force. As one parliamentary deputy puts it, a single foreign journalist is...
Mikhail Gorbachev. On the other, Vytautas Landsbergis, the president of Lithuania, who joins us this morning from Vilnius. Mr. President, good morning.
Yes.
How would you characterize the situation in Vilnius right now?
Kaip apibūdintumėt situaciją Vilniuje dabar, šiuo momentu?
In this moment, the situation is quite calm. We are working in Parliament and also in all offices, factories, and so on. But we are waiting for some possible dealings from the side of Soviet army. They are preparing themselves for a new operation with some troubles for people. They want to take away the gun, the hunting rifles from the people, from the private persons. And in what way it would be done, we don't know today.
How much faith, sir, do you have in President Gorbachev's stated intention to not use force unless lives are threatened?
Kiek jūs pasitikit Gorbačiovo pareiškimą, kad jėga nebus naudojama nebent gyvybės bus pavojuje?
This condition in which the force can be used is very dangerous, because the Soviet troops can make these conditions themselves, and so they can later use the force.
What do you say, sir, to the criticism that you seem to be forcing Mikhail Gorbachev to choose between use of force or loss of face?
Kaip jūs atsakot į tuos kritikus, kurie sako, kad jūs verčiat Gorbačiovą pasirinkti tarp jėgos panaudojimą ir, reiškia, loss of face, kad jis pasirodys blogai prieš pasaulį, kad jis silpnas?
It's unreasonable. Argue. I don't think that the world would be want to see a face of angry and bad man if he would be also a strong man, better than a reasonable and political man.
Mr. President, are you satisfied so far with Washington's understated reaction to events in Lithuania?
Ar jūs patenkintas ligšiolinę Vašingtono tokia santūrė reakcija?
We are waiting for more strong support, because and the United States, they are a state of a great democratic tradition, and they would support the democratic tendencies and the returning of democracy to some countries earlier in decades annexed and suppressed.
President Landsbergis, thank you very much, sir.
Please.
For the Soviet perspective on Lithuania, let's go to Washington now to welcome Oleg Durkovsky. He is a counselor at the Soviet Embassy. Mr. Durkovsky, good morning.
Good morning.
Moscow has promised not to use force. As you've just heard, President Landsbergis intends to hold firm. Where does that leave your government?
Well, primarily we are talking about ensuring law and order. And this is a very important point I would like to underline. Law and order, and we hope that other countries who do care about maintaining law and order in their own countries would understand the developments with regard to the situation in Lithuania.
Okay, but you've still got a standoff, and everybody's talking of a peaceful solution. What's even possible that both sides could live with?
Well, what is possible and what has been suggested by the Congress of People's Deputies in their decision several days ago is a peaceful, calm resolution of the conflict on the basis of respecting the Soviet Constitution, which is the supreme law in the Soviet Union and which takes precedence over any other legal matters.
President Gorbachev promised force wouldn't be used unless lives were threatened. How then do you defend the bloody seizure of so-called deserters yesterday?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as a bloody seizure. It also should be viewed in the context of an attempt of legal power to restore order. First of all, it was not bloody, and I would dispute with you on this issue. And
there are conflicting reports out of Lithuania that it was quite bloody and quite violent.
Well, you know, the question would be valid here. What steps would be taken in other countries with regard to deserters? It's a question of law and order. I'd like to repeat it again.
Oleg Durkovsky, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's appreciated.
Lithuanian leaders refuse to back down from their
He can't afford to be seen as giving in completely to those stubborn Lithuanians. But on the other hand, he can't ignore world opinion. A consensus that the Lithuanian cause is just. A spokesperson for President Gorbachev ruled out an economic blockade, but he nevertheless sounded as though sanctions were still a possibility.
It's not a threat, it's warning. It is, you see, people should know that it's not all the roses which are waiting for them on that rather risky and adventurous road they have been taken by their leadership. It's very friendly, very serious, and very considered warning that it is road to peril. It's not road to roses, to well-being, to flourishing, to, I don't know, to become another Sweden overnight.
One idea hatched in the Kremlin has been to starve Lithuania of raw materials and energy, but sanctions work both ways. Lithuanian industry produces many things the Soviet Union would find it very difficult to do without. Machine tools, for example, and also plastics.
Lithuania is still the part of the Soviet Union, part of its economy and part of its territory. And if I'll make sanctions against my left leg and buy a shoe 2 sizes less, I'll suffer myself. Now, in this way, if it will be sanctions against Lithuania, all the Soviet Union will suffer. And I want to understand in what way is possible to have sanctions against a country which still is not really independent.
The British Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd arrived in the Soviet Union aware of Moscow's preoccupation with Lithuania. He too was in a peculiar position because Britain, like most of the West, is extremely concerned with President Gorbachev's political survival. Lithuanian independence, in the short term at least, has been relegated into second place. Mr. Hurd was being very, very careful.
President Gorbachev is clear about the intense international interest in this subject, and I would say extremely anxious to deal with the matter through an orderly and legal process.
Did you express concern about economic sanctions?
that he was taking.
Yeah, I think I'd better not go into the detail of it. I expressed to Mr. Shevardnadze earlier and again to the President now our concern.
But by week's end, it was still clear the Lithuanian problem remains a real threat to Mr. Gorbachev.
I think that Gorbachev really needs quiet solution. But I understand that if the separation of Lithuania will be very quick, he'll be strongly attacked from right, including army. If it will be very, very slowly, he'll be attacked from the left, including foreign governments. I think situation is very dangerous.
The past several weeks have been a severe testing time for Lithuania's new nationalist leaders. The pressure from Moscow has been enormous. The West has, for the most part, been unable to witness what the Lithuanian people as a whole have been going through, the strong-arm tactics, the daily intimidation. One of the first things Moscow did when the Lithuanians proved uncommonly strong-minded about their independence was to invite Western journalists to go elsewhere. What they hadn't taken into consideration was the presence of one Sue Lloyd-Roberts, a journalist who has always objected to being told what story she may or may not cover. Here's her report on Lithuania for Dateline.
They like to show you Lenin's statue in Vilnius, not because of any loyalty to Lenin, but because if you get the angle right, the architect of today's Soviet Union is seen holding a cross. Lithuanians need all the humor they can muster to cope with the kind of problems they have today, just weeks after they announced their unilateral declaration of independence. So far, the changes have been mainly cosmetic in this handsome city that once ruled an empire of its own 500 years ago. Like across the road from KGB headquarters, where the street nameplate has been changed from Avenue of the Revolution to the name of a Lithuanian national hero. and the banners that proclaim that without independence, Lithuania has no future. But beyond the brave proclamations, people here and in the other Baltic republics are being harassed and persecuted by the Soviet authorities in a desperate attempt to keep the Soviet empire intact. Edita is 19 with a 2-month-old baby. She doesn't know when she'll see her husband again. Her teenage husband was arrested with dozens of others for deserting the Red Army.
After the declaration of independence, he phoned us from his barracks in Leningrad and said he didn't want to serve with the army anymore. I encouraged him to come home. I had no idea he would be arrested. How could they do that to such a young man?
They've been told he's in prison in Siberia, and there's no guarantee of his return. Despite the risk of deportation, several thousand young men are on the run from the Red Army in Lithuania today.
We don't want to serve in an army of occupation. We want our own Lithuanian army.
As the Soviets desperately try to bring the Republic and its unruly young to heel, they warn that civil disobedience will be punished with imprisonment.
It's nonsense to go back to the events of the Second World War and say that the annexation of the Baltic states was illegal. The Baltic states are part of the Soviet Union, and they must remain part of the Soviet Union. Young men who refuse to serve in their country's army must be punished.
Army conscripts dressed as local militia patrol the streets by day. People complain that they're being terrorized by convoys of troops hurtling through small Lithuanian villages at night.
Gorbachev is like Stalin. It's like the terror of the 1940s. Lithuania is so small. We're no threat to the Soviet Union. Gorbachev isn't a democrat. He's an imperialist.
The army harass those who defy Moscow. Officials at the local public prosecutor's office who've refused to arrest deserters run out into the street for safety.
They are brandishing guns at us in there. How can we work? They're trying to destabilize the situation here, to show the world that Lithuania can't cope with independence.
The militia in unmarked cars changes shift outside the newspaper office. The editor says it's like working with a gun at his head. He never knows when Moscow will order the building to be occupied or simply cut off the supplies of ink and paper to stop the pro-independence newspapers. Meanwhile, at the television station, the Communist Party organizes a demonstration calling for an end to pro-Moscow propaganda there. It's a disappointing turnout. The organizers had hoped for several thousand supporters. Only a few hundred Communist Party loyalists turn out, shouting worn-out party slogans. The Russian minority here is losing its appetite for confrontation. But while ordinary Russians may be prepared to stand back and observe the pace of events, the extremists call for the television station to be closed and for the media to be controlled by Moscow. Lithuanian militiamen move in to protect the station. Soviet authorities are hoping that these bullying techniques will intimidate people here into losing enthusiasm for independence. The people of Lithuania say they're determined to show the tactic won't work. Again this week, the Lithuanian parliament has reaffirmed its independence and called for the Soviet army to leave. Lithuania's President Landsbergis has called for calm and for people to ignore provocation from Moscow. As part of the campaign of peaceful protest, Lithuanians are sending telegrams to the Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev. Thousands of them have been sent, copied and stored here at the Lithuanian parliament. Some congratulate him for offering freedom and independence to the other countries of Eastern Europe, but say, isn't it time now for the Baltic states? Some come from people in other republics, even Russians. On the streets, the agreed tactic now is for people to picket the buildings they believe may be threatened by Soviet troops. Within minutes of a rumor circulating the city that a public building may be invaded, thousands surround the building, defying the Soviet army to enter. Independence leaders call on people to keep their nerve and to believe that the will of the people must in the end triumph over tyranny. They warn that Moscow intends to step up the pressure with more economic and political sanctions, and that the struggle for independence will be a hard one. Delegations from other friendly Soviet republics make their way through the crowd to offer support. Republics like Estonia, Latvia, Georgia and the Ukraine, who are also fighting for independence. A speaker from the Ukraine says that Lithuania is the first bird to fly from the Soviet nest, and now other republics want to follow. Lithuania may be leading the way today, but Moscow is determined to make the going tough. More Soviet troops are being moved into the area, and the dream of independence for these people may be a long way from reality yet. Sue Lloyd-Roberts for SBS Dateline in Vilnius, Lithuania.
Sue Lloyd-Roberts reporting. And as a postscript, the Baltic Republic...
Action, now the deadline to repeal independence legislation has passed. ABC correspondent John Lombard.
Lithuanians waited out the Soviet deadline in prayer. They gathered for Easter services, President Landsbergis telling them to try to enjoy their holiday and to get what he called Moscow's unwelcome Easter present. In a televised address, the country's top cleric urged Lithuanians to remain calm but resolute. There was no immediate move by Moscow to implement its threatened fuel blockade, but motorists are taking no chances, queuing to stock up on petrol. Soviet attention focused instead on the United States. A commentary in the Communist Party Daily Pravda warned Washington not to jeopardize the thaw in East-West relations by siding with Lithuania, saying it would be reckless to throw worldwide perestroika under the feet of Lithuanian nationalists who have lost their sense of reality and responsibility. Returning from his Easter break, President Bush said he would not speculate on a U.S. response until Moscow acted on its ultimatum. The Lithuanian parliament...
Baltic state independence claim. After a government meeting, the Lithuanian president has telegrammed Mikhail Gorbachev asking for another meeting to discuss a compromise.
In an interview after the meeting, Lithuania's Prime Minister said her government was prepared to compromise on three key issues: conscription of young Lithuanians for military service, the rights of Soviet citizens in Lithuania, and continued Soviet ownership of Communist Party property. Further, she promised Lithuania would not retaliate by holding back supplies of manufactured goods for the rest of the Soviet Union. For its part, the central government has made no move so far on its threatened blockade. The Moscow depot for export...
3 days reserve of crude oil. The Prime Minister and Foreign Minister have already gone to Norway seeking alternative fuel supplies.
Soviet troops stepped up the war of nerves by briefly deploying near an oil pumping station. Later came word from an engineer at the Lithuanian Mazeiki refinery that the flow of oil had been cut. The Republic has 2 to 3 weeks reserves of fuel. But petrol queues are growing and appeals are being made not to waste heat or electricity. The Lithuanian parliament earlier tried to avoid a showdown by offering a 2-week freeze on any further anti-Soviet legislation. The Bush administration said it was seeking independent confirmation that President Gorbachev has indeed...
On Lithuania, with reports it's cut food supplies to the Republic's ports. There have also been violent scenes in the capital as Soviet troops seized control of the Communist Party's printing works.
Angry already at the grip Moscow now has on their country, Lithuanian independence supporters today fought back as Soviet soldiers occupied a printing plant in Vilnius. The troops beat anyone who resisted. The crowd outside became a taunting, jeering mob, shouting fascists at the soldiers. The day after cutting off 84% of Lithuania's natural gas and all of its oil, The Soviets made it clear what kind of hardball they intend to play. Algirdas Brazauskas, leader of Lithuania's reformist Communist Party, but also the man assigned to keep Lithuania's economy...
Use force against rebel Republic Lithuania if necessary. The warning came as the rebel republic's prime minister was seeking support in Scandinavia.
Denmark never accepted the Soviet
leadership have welcomed a Franco-German initiative to ease tensions. President Mitterrand of France and West Germany's Chancellor Kohl suggested earlier this week that Lithuania temporarily suspend some of its new anti-Kremlin laws. Moscow called the move constructive, and Lithuania's President Landsbergis said it was a positive step which the Republic would debate this week. But meanwhile, the economic blockade against Lithuania is being stepped up.
The blockade is tightening. Even the supply of coal to the Republic has now been halted. Moscow making it clear that it can, by economic means alone, crush Lithuania's dream of independence. As the factories run short of fuel supplies, the human anguish is already being felt. The prospect of mass unemployment is rising, with real fear of hardship ahead. But to the Lithuanian leadership, the Kremlin is simultaneously signaling it wants a political solution. Talk of compromise, of dialogue, now dominating the endless round of meetings. President Landsbergis still telling Moscow independence will stay, everything else is negotiable. Also meeting today were the ethnic Russians, who are already complaining that independent Lithuania is ignoring their...
Latvia's president today called on Moscow to leave the door open for negotiations. Mikhail Gorbachev, though, told Latvian leaders they may face...
for independence from the Soviet Union. The decision came as the new Latvian Prime Minister said the Baltic states must close ranks in their struggle. And in Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev has publicly criticized his own countrymen who are fed up with the Kremlin.
Mikhail Gorbachev was addressing army veterans today, and he used the occasion to denounce what he described as extremists who disrupted last week's May Day parade in Moscow. Demonstrators who followed the official march shouted "Resign, resign" at Kremlin leaders watching from the Lenin mausoleum. Mr. Gorbachev said perestroika was approaching a critical point, and he condemned separatists who are pursuing an irresponsible policy leading to deadlock.
Illegal, and it's now a crime in the Soviet Union to slander or insult the president. Rick Inderfirth reports from Moscow.
Gorbachev's response in the form of 2 presidential decrees was read on Soviet television. It stated that the declarations of the 2 Baltic republics were illegal, that they violated both the Soviet Constitution and a new law on secession. The decrees also parliaments of Latvia and Estonia of violating the legal rights and interests of ordinary Soviet citizens. But there was no mention of what action the Kremlin intends to take.
And has appealed to the West for help.
The moment Moscow fell back on the old ways to deal with defiance is captured in these pictures, snatched by Lithuanian cameramen as their own TV station was overrun. The intent, a bloody lesson that the Republic's declaration of independence was a myth they should stop believing in. But the brutality has brought a stiffening of resolve in Vilnius. A dad's army of militiamen guards the parliament building, and its defences are still being strengthened daily, as are the ranks of those ready day and night for the Red Army assault they seriously expect to face.
Maybe with our sticks, with our knives only, we can do something.
The city library has become a field medical centre, staffed by teams of surgeons and stacked with emergency equipment. Evidence of the distrust which the Kremlin's fur-hatted envoy saw for himself when he was checked rigorously before being allowed to meet President Landsbergis. Lithuania's leader wants Western countries to put pressure on the Soviet Union.
Why do you not want to help us?
A vast anti-tank ditch around the Lithuanian parliament speaks of the political chasm to be bridged with Moscow.
Leaders overwhelming approval and help Lithuania in its struggle to secede from the Soviet Union. The referendum was scheduled after the recent military crackdown in the Baltics.
It's called illegal. Mikhail Gorbachev. Lithuania's President Vytautas Landsbergis says the balloting shows his country is united in a desire to be free of Soviet
government from the Soviet Union.
This morning, the ballot boxes showed just how far he was wrong. This polling station in Vilnius counted a resounding 90% in favor of independence, a result that was echoed across the Republic. The triumphant Lithuanian president, Vytautas Landsbergis, emerged at 2 in the morning. This is a victory against lies and intimidation, he said. The Lithuanian people reject lies and are not afraid. Lithuanians themselves seemed delighted by what they had done. The result is top class, this man says. The future will be different, she says. Lithuania will exist, and the good people of the world will help us. Gorbachev called the vote invalid, but nearly 85% of Lithuanians went to the polls. And most embarrassing for the Soviet leader, even many ethnic Russians voted for independence. If we live on Lithuanian land, says Valentina Seskova, we have to support the Lithuanian nation. Outside the barricaded parliament today, patriotic songs. For Gorbachev, more trouble ever.
I don't believe people are suicidal. Any attempt to break up the country would be a disaster for us and the whole world.
At another polling station in Moscow, Gorbachev's chief political rival, Boris Yeltsin, made the argument for voting against.
Gorbachev wants to preserve the system. He wants to preserve the communist bureaucracy. I think it should be destroyed.
Soviet authorities say there was a huge turnout for the referendum, with over 100 million people voting. But it was also a sometimes chaotic affair. Many voters were confused by the wording of the referendum, which called for a renewed federation of sovereign republics, with no details provided. 6 republics, those seeking outright independence from
Imaginable was happening. Moscow. The clocks were being turned back by the new masters of the Soviet Union. But many people were refusing the new rule. At this moment, people are standing in front of tanks and armored vehicles. There have already been outbreaks of violence. People have been attempting to drag crews from their tanks, trying to convince them to turn around and go back to base. President Gorbachev's hold on power in the Soviet Union was always precarious. Now he's gone, a victim of a right-wing coup, replaced by hardline communists, the men who want to go back to the old ways. Those who had dealt with Gorbachev over the years were sympathetic. Margaret Thatcher, a personal friend, had no doubts who was behind his downfall.
So the whole world will be watching very carefully indeed what happens to Mr. Gorbachev. This is an old-fashioned style attempt at a coup, belonging to the Stalin and Brezhnev era, to keep people by tanks and the army and the KGB.
Soviet television broke the news first thing this morning, saying Gorbachev was replaced for health reasons, the usual excuse given when a Soviet leader is overthrown. In his place, a committee headed by hardline Vice President Gennady Yuneyev. Predictably, the committee is made up of Gorbachev's enemies, including the defense minister and the heads of the KGB. At the same time, Soviet television showed live pictures of Red Square, apparently an attempt to show people that the military was not on the streets, that despite the crisis, life was going on as normal. But the reality was the troops were indeed on the move, pictures here taken by Western television. Armoured vehicles drove through the streets of Moscow, heading for pre-arranged positions, a show of strength aimed at dissuading demonstrators. Gorbachev was reportedly under house arrest at his holiday home. The Russian president, Boris Yeltsin, is resisting the takeover. He crawled up onto a tank this morning in front of the Russian parliament building and demanded that Gorbachev be allowed to address the nation and called on the people to fight back with a general strike. There was a chilling warning of what was to come only last weekend when one of Gorbachev's closest allies, Alexander Yakovlev, resigned from the Communist Party, warning that communist hardliners were plotting a coup, that the neo-Stalinists, as he called them, had taken control and were out to publicly humiliate the Soviet president. The new leaders have declared a state of emergency throughout certain areas of the Soviet Union for the next 6 months. They claim they seized power to save the country from, quote, economic chaos and disintegration. Gorbachev was due back in Moscow from his holidays today. He was to sign the Union Treaty with the 5 republics, The new leaders have already said the treaty won't now be signed because it would destroy the Soviet Union as a viable economic entity.
I'm afraid these people are very serious. They will continue the dictatorship. They will arrest Yeltsin, Landsbergis. They will arrest all the radical Democrats. And they are embarked on a really military right-wing coup. And it's very serious. It's not just for a while.
After 6 years of perestroika, Gorbachev's popularity has been battered by food shortages, ethnic strife, and the struggle to drag the economy into the modern age. Other Eastern European countries benefited from Gorbachev's decisions. They set in train the events throughout East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and more recently Yugoslavia. All along, the people of the Soviet Union were seeing the other nations benefit. Their lives seemed, if anything, worse. World leaders, including President Bush, have been taken by surprise. They're scurrying to gather what scraps of information they can about the coup which has toppled their ally.
There is a great deal of information we don't yet have, but I would like to make clear, above all, that we will expect the Soviet Union to respect and honor all those commitments that President Gorbachev has made on its behalf.
The new battle for democracy in the Soviet Union is about to begin. Now the Soviet people have been given a taste of freedom, they won't give it up easily. The troops are out on the streets to stop the uprisings, but recent elections have shown the majority want democracy and not the...
Late edition, thank you for joining us. More than 50,000 demonstrators have massed outside the Russian parliament, shouting support for ousted President Mikhail Gorbachev. They're responding to calls from Russian President Boris Yeltsin for demonstrations against the new hardline regime. He's been holed up inside the parliament since Monday to rally resistance to the takeover. Meanwhile, the Russian vice president is reported to have announced that Mikhail Gorbachev's been brought back to the Kremlin from the holiday home where he was being held.
In the last hour, a huge crowd has gathered outside the Russian Federation building. Tens of thousands of Muscovites responding to Boris Yeltsin's call to defend their parliament. It was the largest rally since the coup and illegal under the new state of emergency regulations. Last night, some tanks even flew the Russian rather than Soviet flag. But with Yeltsin trapped inside the parliament, coup leaders survived their first night in office almost without incident. In a city of divided loyalties, it wasn't even clear if the soldiers outside were detaining Yeltsin or protecting him. During the night, the mayor of Moscow, Gavril Popov, also a radical Democrat, met with Yeltsin for a hurried meeting on strategy. By daylight, the stark images were still evident. The Kremlin now a fortress. Barricades had sprung up, and tanks are still on the streets of the city. Parts of Moscow's ring road remain blocked by buses. But elsewhere there is a sense of normality. Yeltsin's call for a general has met with a patchy response in the capital, an ominous development for those who hoped that the Soviet people would not tolerate a return to a Brezhnev-style regime. But from the reformers, a continuing defiance. At this stage, they're refusing to take part in...
He congratulated the Soviet people and also had words of gratitude for Boris Yeltsin. This morning, Gorbachev arrived back at the Kremlin. Also this morning, Boris Yeltsin told Parliament the leaders of the coup are in custody. He said 4 have been arrested. A 5th, former Interior Minister Boris Pugo, killed himself when police went to arrest him. Later, Yeltsin addressed a massive crowd outside the Russian parliament. There was wave after wave of cheers from the...
And once again, we have to start off by saying the news, the twists and the events are still coming out of the Soviet Union, where communism is in the process of collapsing. Today's top story, the military advisor to Mikhail Gorbachev, Marshal Akramayov, has committed suicide. This following the coup attempt this past week. We'll be getting to that and a lot of other stories this morning.
Under house arrest and claimed to have taken over his powers and the central government as well. But the people said no. They demonstrated by the hundreds of thousands in support of perestroika. In Moscow, they were galvanized by the heroic stand of Russian President Boris Yeltsin, and by Wednesday, the coup had remarkably failed. By Thursday, Gorbachev was back in Moscow, but not back in full power. On
Soviet Union. This follows the refusal of the newly created State Council in Moscow to discuss Georgia's declaration of independence. At its first meeting, the State Council recognised the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, as independent nations. However, the 3 say they won't really begin celebrating until all Soviet troops have left Baltic soil.
What has happened today is a very serious and historic
without any exaggeration, decision, which means that those three countries, the Baltic countries, are from now on independent. So we regard them as independent countries, and we intend from now on to conduct our relations with them on that basis.
Landsbergis later appeared on Moscow television in an historic live link-up with the leaders of Latvia and Estonia. But the response was muted in Vilnius today.
I heard it. I'm very happy about it.
Why?
Why? I have always wanted to be free.
Here in the Baltics, the people have never lowered their expectations, and they've never wavered in their quest for freedom. So though it's been a difficult birth, now that democracy has finally arrived, there's more relief than surprise. Rather than a massive outpouring of emotion, the communities are knuckling down to the awesome task of nation building. So while the symbols of the old way remain
11 Republic leaders, including Boris Yeltsin, have signed an accord creating a Commonwealth of independent states, ending the reign of President Mikhail Gorbachev. The new Commonwealth has yet to announce who'll control the nuclear arsenal. US Secretary of State James Baker has called an international conference to organise more food and medical aid. Sport.